Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Hello, Neha. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
Very good. Thank you. We have another special guest with us today. Neha, would you like to introduce our special guest, David?
Yes. Yes. This is David Yee. He's a VP of engineering at New York Times. I'll let him say his title. But David and I got to know each other through the lead dev circuit and because we're both kind of involved on speaking and stuff, but really it's more of a meeting of minds. I'm really excited to have him here because we're going to transparently lay out some of the conversations we've been having behind the scenes. We tend to joke that some of our conversations are like stuff that you usually don't necessarily want to say on stage, but it's like about how to get things done actually. So anyway, it's really nice to have someone else out there who is willing to just drop all the formalities and the quips and whatever and just talk about how to actually get things done. And so that's why I'm really excited to have David. Do you want to introduce yourself with your former title or whatever on at New York Times?
Yeah. Hi, I'm David. I'm also super psyched to be here. My title recently changed, so I'm still VP of Engineering at the New York Times. I am now the head of engineering for the new AI platforms and products mission. So it's a mission that's sort of coming into existence recently at the New York Times, and we're building products that are sort of user facing, reader facing, that use large language models and the platforms to make it easier for engineers to build them. Yeah, this is going to be fun. It's the sort of transition from quiet conversations to sort of like thinking out loud about the kinds of stuff you can't say on stage. So I'm mostly just excited to be here.
Yeah,
Awesome.
I feel like my favorite stuff that we talk about is like how to get shit done.
Hmm.
And I remember recently when we were talking about how to get shit done when and like why is that so hard and why is that a full time job? And one of the things that you were starting to talk about was that, well, to be clear, like when you are trying to change something at an institution, right? Its job is to not change. And so, like, you're basically rolling a ball uphill, or what is it, a boulder uphill. And of course, it's going to be hard. And of course, that's like not natural because you're trying to introduce something unnatural to the environment. So I was curious if you've had any more thoughts around that since like we kind of went really deep into it. And I feel like that's something that a lot of people need to hear about is just like, okay, this is the fact of the matter. Like, of course, it's not easy because of these reasons.
Yeah. The I think so. I've been at the New York, just so for some broader context. Like I've been at the New York Times for almost 8 years. I've worked in startups. I've worked in sort of smaller media organizations, and so just for some context, in terms of the New York Times, it's roughly 500 engineer space. So it's smaller than some, bigger than others. But just like from the perspective of size, that's sort of one place to place it. But it is also like this year, 175 years old as a institution
Yeah.
since
Yeah. That's an
it's
institution.
yeah, and it's what we would call its most recent incarnation, right? Like so that's like the New York Times pre-existed that, but like at the time that Adolf Fox bought it and turned it into the newspaper that everybody in New York reads and everybody in the world reads, that institution's been around for a really long time. And so yeah, I think when you and I have talked about it, and I think the context that I give a lot of people who are starting out at the New York Times is based on essentially a reflection on the first 2 or 3 years I was at the Times when I was constantly like, "You brought me here," like, with this sort of quasi-narcissistic, maybe typically narcissistic engineer view of, like, what it's like to join an organization and say, "Well, you brought me here to you wanted me to make more me's, you want me to change this organization. Why are you making it so hard?" And I think maybe it's only in the last year or two that I've come to really understand that, like, actually the whole point to what you said, Neha, the whole point is that it's hard. That there are a few different ways you can change the organization, but expectations, being honest about expectations with an institution is like, that's my whole new thing. That's like when I talk to engineering managers joining the organization, when I talk to senior leaders joining the organization, is this idea that says like, you really are going to have to pick your fight, because you don't get to like run roughshod over the whole thing.
I feel like what's really interesting is okay, cool. That makes sense for like a large institution, something that's been around for a long time. But like, what happens with a small company? Because like, I've recently started a new company, Motif, and so that's a small company, and Mike is also at a small company, right? And like something, there is something about like there may not be an institution, but you're inheriting some sort of culture and some sort of like natural way of going, and it probably is based on the leaders of the company, then, right? And for both Mike and I, we enter into a company and then therefore change the dynamic because we are potentially changing the institution itself. Because now, I guess, like, there is the leaders of the company before, then you enter in and you become part of leadership. And then now, from now on, you are influencing the leadership as well. So I was curious, Mike, like, have you experienced that feeling of an institution and then feeling about how it changed and people pinning their hopes on you and also you feeling like how much influence you can have over this institution?
Yeah, I feel it's like in some ways a blessing and a curse, right? Being the new person to come in, like particularly if you're kind of coming in as a leader, right? Like the classic one I always think about as an engineer is like the onboarding docs or process where lots of people, I mean, generally almost every engineer I know who's come in at almost every time, there's been something in the onboarding process that makes you go like, oh, why are we doing it that way? Right. And then give it a week, a month, 6 months, a year, and then you're the person being like, "No, actually, there's a really good reason for that, and if you change it, then everything will fall over," right? And I think that's the thing that I find really fun, but also really hard, like, knowing that my gut's gonna have that adverse reaction to perhaps almost everything, and almost being like, well, which are the ones that actually stick with me? The team seems to agree and seems to actually have a basis, or maybe we like tweak it and things get a little bit better versus we tweak it and everything falls over and everyone starts crying. So yeah, like I guess that's that's been my experience.
I feel like what's interesting is that, like, so David and Mike, both of you kind of talked about like the journey of like getting familiar with the company, right? And so it's like starts with like, I know everything. And then it's like, wait a minute, I know nothing, right? And then it's like, okay, can I do something about it? And like, what can I do? And then you start to experiment around, you start to like, knock on the different Jenga blocks and figure out what you can pull out. And then you're like, okay, I know what it takes to get it done. And then you like become matrix informed and you're like, okay, I see the whole matrix. I see how things are interrelated. I can do anything, but what should I do and at what cost? Right. And so I feel like if you've done it enough times, you know that you're about to go through that journey. I think every step of that journey is important. You can't skip a step. And I also think that that first part where you're like, wait, why is this the way it is? I think it's a very precious and important step. Like, I don't think we should all impose all of our opinions on other people. But I feel like hearing that, if you don't have like fresh people coming in who are questioning the way things are, then like essentially you're like stuck with every single inherited constraint so far. And like you don't notice whether constraints have changed. And so I think it's a precious step to like be like question all constraints without ruining the institution and also like increasing unhappiness about constraints that you can't change. So anyway, that's like kind of I was like observing both of you are talking about your journeys and it's like it's a necessary part of being familiar with a company.
So, as you were talking, I was kind of thinking, and like, I don't know that I feel super comfortable with this analogy, but it feels a lot like dating. And so I think like, oh, like, can I change? Like, I don't really like. Is that how they brush their teeth? Like, is there any way I could change that? Or like,
You're like, how much do we
underwear is
care
lying
about
on the
it? But it
ground.
does annoy me. Yeah.
Exactly, it does annoy me. Is this a fight that I want? Is a battle I want to fight? And as I thought of that, I was like, I don't think that people I don't think that most workers try to think about institutions as individual people as much as they should. Like,
Mm.
this is this is I think, like, what people often think about is, like, it's the CEO, or it's, like, the CTO, or this particular leader, or that particular leader is just messing me up, right? And, like, you come in like, certainly, like, I totally know exactly, like, how you think about it, Mike, when you walk into an organization, you're like, "I don't like this. Whose idea was this?" And like, they are misguided, right? It's like this person, these people, but different to what I think people expect at a startup. And I'm really curious what you all think about smaller companies, since you're both at much smaller companies presumably than I am now. But like, what I've come to learn about institutions working at a larger company is like, it is very much like it's very much like the positioning that like the British royal family makes, which is it's not the queen, it's the crown. And like an institution is an entity. It is an entity that has behaviors and flaws and preferences. And it is as one of the people you're going to date in your lifetime, the longer that they've been alive, the more hidebound they are about changing. And so yeah, I think if there was anything I wish I had known 8 or 10 years ago, whatever, it would be that to actually really consider the personality of an organization as a real thing, like not as an imagined construct, but as a real thing, because it is.
Yeah, I think that's a helpful way of framing it. I like that. I like that approach because I feel like I've seen stuff with coworkers, past and present. I'm sure I'll see it in the future as well, where people behave at work in a completely different way to how they do anywhere else in their life, because that's how the organization and the culture or whatever has taught them to do. And I mean, sometimes you even forget there's like a particular name for this, but like sometimes I feel like you sometimes see this psychological thing where literally everyone is behaving in a way that no one really likes, but everyone thinks that everyone else will freak out if they don't behave that way, because that's what the culture is and that's what the stage is, right? And the place I'm at right now is really interesting because it's been around for like 10 plus years and it's got a very high average tenure, but it's still a pretty small organization, like 40, 50 people. And I find it kind of fascinating because everywhere I've been before has been either this size or smaller, but much like a much newer organization or a much bigger and older organization. So it's, I feel like it's taught me a lot in that respect about kind of culture and maybe like inertia and also like what you can do as the outsider when you come in and those moments where you do notice that like I feel like maybe no one wants to do this and everyone's just doing it because they think they have to. And then you can give them permission to be like, look, let's all try not doing this for a week. If it all falls over, that's my fault. Like the CEO will tell me off, and then we try it, and then it doesn't fall over, and then everyone's happy, and you're like, great, right? And then sometimes you do it, and it's a disaster, and everyone's unhappy. It's. I wish I could predict in advance, 100% accuracy, which one would be which, but try and error, I guess.
I think what you mentioned about like people being a little bit different than like what they normally are like, right? And maybe not even liking who they've become. It's like must be some sort of average between the institution and the individual, right? Or like some sort of compromise between the two. And the longer that you've been there, you have to adopt some sort of compromises to be different from who you are in order to stay there and to sustain and to essentially like find an identity. And, if our job is to bring in change and our job is to push us forward or our job is to help the company adapt to new conditions, then like, first of all, that's easiest when you're new, right? You're new, you can kind of like take the blame and you can take a few hits. And also, you don't have that established reputation at the institution and like that sort of brand that people expect from you. And so you can kind of jump out of that. But if you're not that, then, you still have a responsibility as a leader to introduce that change and to find a way to break the mold and to give people a space and some place of comfortability to try something new. And I think that that comes back to what you were saying, Mike, which is like taking on the risk for the team. So, okay, cool. We have to change something. Everyone else is very used to the way things are done, especially at a 10-year-old company, a 20-year-old, people who've been at the company for 10 years, 20 years, et cetera, right? They're stuck in a certain way. Everyone wants to change. They can't. You have to be the one to kind of take on that risk and give people permission and find a way to introduce something different, right?
Yeah, like I guess a question for David, like what I mean, it's kind of wild when you think of a organization that's like hundreds of years old. And obviously, the engineering organization is, I would imagine, not yet hundreds of years old. But I mean, have you got examples of any cultural things that you have that maybe have gone way, way farther back than what you might have expected or anticipated?
It's so old that it's hard to tell. I think there's probably there's a ton, right? And like some of them are just they make a ton of sense when you actually look at what the organization does and what the institute, not even the organization, the institution, right? The 175-year institution values. And then you try to imagine overlaying the culture of, the Silicon Valley company over that. And you're like, there's some things that are just like directly oppose. So the two things I can think about that are really interesting, and like so I sometimes say that. So the job I had before this, which was now years ago, was at Vox Media, and the New York Times is different from Vox Media because Vox Media was effectively, it started essentially as a sports blog company, right? So all of SB Nation was where Vox Media started, and so SB Nation and Vox Media were essentially like a digital product organization. Like they built a CMS called Chorus, which 10 years ago was like famous in the media and journalism industry for being this amazing content management system that everybody wanted to have and everybody wanted to know what it was. And so they built these newsrooms. They built The Verge. They built Vox.com. Like all of the sort of companies, all the brands that Vox Media has or had were built on top of a product organization. So you had a bunch of journalists who essentially worked for a digital product organization. The New York Times is exactly the opposite. New York Times is a newsroom that is 175 years old, that has all of the history, all of the mistakes, all of the pattern matching of that organization. And everybody in the world knows that newsroom. And it has a digital product organization built on top of it. And for years, like there was this question about if you think about just content management systems, so digital content management system, there was this question of, does the digital report chase the print report, or does the print report chase the digital report? And there was a moment at which literally the content management system of record became the digital one and not the one that was generating the print report, because they've used computers and content management for the print report for a long time. And so there are a couple of moments like that where you've actually had to watch the organization say, the thing that moves fast, the thing that is more unpredictable, the thing that is read by different people to the people who subscribe to the newspaper is now the paper of record.
Mm.
And that was a huge shift. But the Times is deliberate, right? So when every year they announce the Pulitzer Prizes, it's a really big thing at the New York Times. And not to toot the New York Times' horn, but we do frequently win Pulitzer Prizes. And so like everybody piles into the middle of the newsroom, which is this sort of big open atrium, this 2-floor atrium. And the executive editor, Joe Kahn, stands on the stairs in that atrium and announces all of whoever has won a Pulitzer Prize. And then there's a whole litany of people who come up and talk about it, including the person who's done the writing or the photography or the editing, and there's frequently dozens of people attached to any given prize. And it is not uncommon to be in that room and hear the person receiving the prize say, this was a piece of work that was 7 years in the making.
Mm.
Imagine if you took 7 years to deliver a meaningful software product, right?
No.
It would never happen. Like it would never, 18 months. Like we ran out of money. It's not going to happen, right? But like at the New York Times, they are willing to take the time to do two things: to be right on the facts and to do impactful reporting, sometimes on the order of years. What does that mean for the digital product organization? It means that sometimes, like, and even though in journalism companies, there's a split between the newsroom and the business that's really important to maintain, where one side really doesn't talk to the other by design to make sure that the reporting stays clear. Every once in a while, a cultural precept crosses that boundary. And so you can find yourself frequently debating small truths about a software product or about a product that you're going to deliver to your users. An engineer who's come in and worked at a faster moving place, as indeed I was when I first got there, can sometimes say, why are we talking about this? But it is because the institution has that behavior and culture. So like Mike, when you're talking about it, it's like you see people behaving differently. Like you can actually track how somebody's decision-making process changes as they become more adapted to and malleable to the practices of this organization in that way. And it's not bad per se. It really isn't. It's just, it's different to what we expect if we are engineers coming out of, fast-moving startups. And there are reasons for it that you can question all day long, but it ain't going to change.
Well, this kind of comes into like constraints, right? So it's like There's like real life constraints about like how humans work, about like how technology works, about how the news works. Then there's like company constraints, right? And then if you want to prevent yourself from burning out, you need to be realistic about like what constraints there are and then like where the chances are for opportunity for change, right? And
Mhm.
also potentially at a place that's like so polar opposite in terms of rate of change, right? You almost have to like stay tuned into like what the rate of change is in the software world when you're like going when you are trying to complement an institution that's like used to a lower rate of change and you have to like stay in tune on your own in order to drive that pace and to adhere to that pace. So like how do you know which constraints to like listen to and which not to, and how do you identify opportunities for change if like an institution is used to going slower, but still kind of demands you to go faster and doesn't know how to reconcile that without you.
It's like the I got into a conversation with a colleague of mine earlier this week about norms because I said, look, we're spinning up this whole new mission, so it's great. Like, you know, you know, forming, storming, norming, performing, right? So like, what are we gonna do? Like, well, let's just start with norming. And I was like, you can do that, but like, if you're gonna do that, you have to be real honest about where we're starting, right? And one of my favorite trips is like to look at an organization's stated norms and be like, okay, what two are missing from this?
Mm,
Because it's like, and that's actually the most important norms are missing, I feel like, from the written norms, or they're the flip side of a norm, right? So it's like we are agile. We're like, and this is, I'm just imagining a norm for a company. This is we're agile, right? You flip it. It's like, okay, we're reckless, right? Or we're deliberate, we're slow, right? And it's not that like one is true and one's not true. It's just
mm,
there's two different interpretations of that.
mm.
So the first, I don't know. I'm really curious what the two of you think, because like for my part, I think most organizations and certainly institutions go way out of their way not to tell you and not to signal which things are movable and which things are immovable, because like if everybody just knew the things that could be moved, the rate, like, there's a limited taste even for that. And so I'm curious, like, what you two have seen when you've thought about how to determine what things can be changed and what things can't be changed.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mike, you want to go first? Yeah.
I was gonna say I can definitely relate to that sense that like both the norms that are missing and also the kind of I always love that saying that essentially I'm gonna paraphrase terribly, but like, your biggest strength is generally your biggest weakness, right? And that applies for like teams and cultures and organizations as well. And also just I think the nice thing that we have in engineering, right, is we have a culture of trade-offs where so many, almost maybe every choice is like, look, there's not a right or a wrong answer here. There's just, if you do this, this is the variables that are going to be good. If you do this, these are the variables that are going to be good. And I guess like something I've kind of like to do with the norms is when I see a problem or whatever, and I see the cultural norms or whatever, is I will try and do it the way the organization states that it's meant to be done and assume that all the stated norms are correct and maybe the unstated norms are not or whatever. And then when that doesn't work, then sometimes I'm just like, well, either I give up or I sort of like just try a different approach, right? So, like, for example, I'm trying to think of a good one that I can actually say. So, yeah, for example, like a company that says, like, we like to do all our communication in the public, right? But then in the public, people just don't say things because they don't feel comfortable doing it in the public. And then, so you create a private space and then people say things. And it's like, well, the stated norm perhaps, or the value was like, we believe in public communication. But then the unstated one was like, and if you can't say it publicly, don't say it at all. Right. Whereas that's, there's maybe like a higher one there where it's like, well, actually, like we would rather you said it in public, but if you can't, it's better that you say it privately and we resolve the problems and whatever. And again, like I feel like sometimes when you can, those unstated ones that you made the point, David, but like when you can say them out loud and stuff, it's like, well, which is more important, that we don't use private Slack channels or we deliver value to our customers, right? And that's like basically obvious in every company, right? Unless I don't know, most organization would not put it that way. But like often that's not the way people think about it or frame it or whatever. And it sometimes does take an outsider to frame it like that for people to be like, yeah, like that. When you put it like that, it's kind of obvious the choice we're making, and it's obvious that maybe things need to change or whatever. And then I guess my final point, like Neha saw me doing this a bunch at GitHub, is like sometimes I'll just be like, oh, the organization says not to do this, and I have no consensus or agreement. I'm just going to do it and see what happens. I'm prepared
Mm,
for like the entire organization to jump on me and say, no, Mike, don't do it that way. And then I'm like, cool. I learned the norm. Like
Yeah.
I will undo. We will return to, you know, a state of calm. And then sometimes it's the other way around, where people are like, oh, well, we were just waiting for someone to kind of take the first step. But yeah, what about you, Neha? Like, what's
I
your
mean, I think what's interesting about what you're saying is like if you are coming in and you're on a new team, you're establishing a new culture, or you're just trying to learn the way of the ropes and there are established norms or stated norms. The test balloon is just trusting it and then seeing how far you get to what you're actually optimizing for, which is progress or delivering value to the customer or whatever. And when you don't deliver value to the customer, then you start to debug. And then you start to learn about like what is actually missing. And people will kind of come out of the woodwork and be like, okay, well, if you actually want to get things done, then this is what you do. Now, as a manager, as you're bringing in new people, if you want to help your individuals, your peers, your manager get things done, you then attempt to help them understand, okay, we write this norm, but like if you want to get things done, you can get them done faster this way. And you are the cultural translator of those norms. But all of that goes into reinforcing the norm. When it comes to changing the norm, right? Like you have a few options. You can, like, this is why, especially for leaders, organizational design is so important. Understanding what you're trying to do and then understanding what is the natural gravitational pull for the people that you're working with, which is essentially the institution of like what your team is, right? And understanding what the difference is. If you need to change it, one of your options is to change around the people. AI is like such a great example of this, where AI is changing one of the things that we're used to, which is the rate of change of information, and also how like we don't have a lot of clarity as to like what we want the outcome to be because of the rate of change of technology. So you need people who are comfortable with ambiguity and energized by the rate of change, right? Progress needs to be something that like they get energized by, and stability needs to be something that they rely on less. And so by changing those by introducing new people, introducing fresh blood, or finding the people who are most energized by that, you might have a chance to make a little bit more progress against the institution in order to accomplish the goal. And then the other piece that I just started thinking about, especially at my current organization, is if you need to introduce change as a mandate from above or as because of the needs of the business or their customer, chances are you're changing a norm that is going to be uncomfortable for people. And that is a destabilization for engineers whose job it is to stabilize a system. A lot of engineers who create stability crave stability. If you are going to and have to destabilize, then you need to provide a different avenue for stability so that they have something as you destabilize the thing that they used to derive stability from. And understanding what people derive stability from and how much they need in order to make the progress that you need to make progress on gives you the new world of like what you could try to stabilize. You don't know necessarily the right answer, but you have options now and you can see the world a little bit more clearly behind like the current set of things and what people say and more about the norms and the institution and all those layers behind, which is like what we've spent this entire podcast talking about is all of those layers and how they like pile on top of each other. So anyway, that's like what you all made me think about today. And like what this conversation kind of sparked in me is like understanding how do you make change happen if like the gravitational pull of an institution is to stay the way it is, right?
I was thinking this week about like the job of a manager versus the job of a director or a manager of managers is being like the most wonderful and difficult thing about being a line manager is that you have expressed in 4 to 10 people the boundary line between the abstraction that is the business and the reality that is people. And And so exactly what you're talking about in terms of like the destabilization of folks on the ground is like you're giving that to the people who have like in general, the least experience in the business, and you're asking them to hold that, right? That they're the bonds between sort of like two Dodge Chargers that are like pulling in opposite directions, in fifth gear, right? So I think that the thing that I am very lucky in that, like, for a little while I get to manage engineers. Like for a very little while I get to manage engineers, and I love it. It's like candy canes for me. It's perfect because I get to say the thing that I never say, which is on an engineering team, every new person you add to that team creates an entire new team, right? It is a completely new team. I can't do that with like a 125 person engineering organization. My CTO can't do it with a 500 person engineering organization. You can't say, yeah, we hired somebody in such and such a team, so it's going to revisit all of the engineering norms. But you can do it on a team. And you can hold enough direct, not even transitive, but direct trust with your engineers to be able to be their stability and
Mm,
say the thing
mhm,
that isn't
mhm,
changing is like our relationship, my relationship to you
mhm,
as an individual human being. So you bring somebody else in, it's like, oh, they're like a senior engineer and they worked at Google and whatever, like what they like, or like this person comes from a different culture and like I don't know how I feel about that. It's gonna be weird. It's like that's cool. It's supposed to be weird. It's a new team. Like, that's the whole point. Which has all sorts of implications for like more flexible staffing models, to your point. But like I think that there's such a wonderful thing about being able to express the change that we're talking about. Like, I don't think most engineering managers, I certainly as an engineering manager, didn't think about the institution as a whole, except in the ways its decisions were indirectly passed down to me. Like that abstraction again felt like people, but it is the institution. The only people who understand the institution directly are the people who are closest to the outside of it, right? Or to the core of it, depending on how you talk about it, which is us, right? The people who have some authority and enough authority to look at it and be like, that norm the reason everybody is acting this way, like I have the context on that. And it's just like somebody made a mistake 7 years ago and like dropped the production inventory database. And now, like, there's an audit committee for every change, every migration that comes in. Like, and we've been doing it for 7 years and like everyone just forgot. But that's the institution got hurt. And so there's on this giant entity that is your company, there's this little boo-boo on the forearm, and you're like, it's okay, guy. It's okay. We can let's let's add a column. It's gonna be okay.
Well, on a positive note of it's going to be okay. David, thank you for joining us. Neha, thank you for being here. And everyone, thank you for listening. And we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.